I run budget commander tournaments. These tournaments are very strictly regulated to a €50 price point and have become a fixture in my local community, with many talented and creative deck builders participating to show the best they can do, given the restrictions. At first, the decks brought to the tournament were, as you might expect, upgraded pauper commander lists, casual decks spiced up a bit, or ideas found on the internet. But as I hosted more and more tournaments, and we all got better at building for them, we quickly realized that to be properly competitive, none of that was enough. Pauper Commander needed too many replacements. Casual decks were obviously completely misguided, and to top it off, our environment was just too strong for the usual budget lists you see online to stand any chance. Net decking became impossible. How wonderful is that? So, allow me to give you the opportunity to net deck. Here are 3 of the strongest budget commander decks that we have seen at our tournaments. First, we've got Magda, Brazen Outlaw. Magda, Brazen Outlaw is a 2-mana mono-rare commander. She gives other dwarves we control +1/+0, but that doesn't really matter. More importantly, whenever a dwarf we control becomes tapped, we create a treasure token. We can also sacrifice 5 treasures to search our deck for an artifact or dragon card and put it directly onto the battlefield. Magda is a fast combo commander. Her goal is to gather 10 treasures, which we do by playing lots of small stinky dwarves that we tap by either attacking or by teaching them how to drive. Then, once we have 10, we can search our deck for 2 artifacts, which are Clock of Omens and an artifact dwarf like Adaptive Automaton or Free Tree Mascot. Clock of Omens is a 4-mana artifact that lets us tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to untap target artifact. With it, an artifact dwarf and Magda on the battlefield, we can tap the artifact dwarf and the Clock of Omens to untap our artifact dwarf. Because the dwarf is tapped during this process, Magda creates a new untapped treasure. At this point, we have our artifact dwarf untapped again and an untapped treasure. We can now tap the artifact dwarf and the treasure to repeat this process, entering into a loop that lets us create an infinite number of tapped treasures. And because wizards were presumably too busy playing... Wait a sec, when did Magda get released? January 2021. So what was released in the months before that? Oh no. Oh no. It's even worse than I thought. Because wizards were presumably too busy playing Genshin Impact to give the tiniest shit about card balance, Magda doesn't require untapped treasures to be able to sacrifice them. Infinite tapped treasures give us infinite searches. So, next we make sure our opponents don't interrupt what's to come. Godpharaoh's statue increases the mana cost of their spells by 2, Spine of Ishtar and Meteor Golem blow up any relevant on-board effects, and Vexing Bauble handles free spells. Then we grab either Academy Manufactor or Battered Golem, both of which turn our infinite tapped treasures into infinite untapped treasures, giving us infinite mana. Finally, we can either use the clues to draw our entire deck and finish the game with a Reckless Fireweaver, or tutor out Pyrite Spellbomb and Elixir of Immortality. Pyrite Spellbomb can be sacrificed to deal 2 damage to any target, and Elixir of Immortality shuffles itself and our graveyard back into our deck, at which point we can just tutor both out again and repeat the process until everybody is dead. As already mentioned, Magda needs 10 treasure to combo. That may sound like a big hurdle, but it's actually quite easy. She generates tons herself, and of course, Red has access to lots of cards that make treasures. While her progress towards winning may seem telegraphed, you can't ever trust that telegraph, as it can change out of nowhere. The treasures also stick around even if Magda gets killed, and she only costs 2 mana, meaning that while removal slows her down, it never keeps us safe. I've played games where I nuked her to 10 mana, and she still won. Magda is, of course, nothing new. She's a well-known and respected CEDH commander. It's actually not at all unusual that players try to adapt CEDH into budget tournament decks. However, that doesn't work quite as well as you might expect. Due to the budget restriction, fast mana is effectively banned from the format, and only a tiny number of free spells are available. I should also mention that Soul Ring is just actually banned because I didn't want tournaments to be decided entirely by who gets to start with that nonsense in their opening hand. Soul Ring is a bit of an exception here because it's the only fast mana piece that's really cheap. Fast mana and free spells are a core component of CEDH, and the lack of them creates a fundamentally different environment, with less explosive turns, while resources need to be gathered sustainably. Many combo lines also need to be built more intricately, since the most powerful combo starters tend to be quite expensive. Standard CEDH strategies just don't work that well, not to mention that many CEDH commanders cost a good chunk of change themselves. And that's where Magda stands out. She costs less than €1, her starters are a bunch of terrible one-mana dwarves, and her basic combo line also barely costs anything. This leaves nearly the entire budget open for great value pieces, precisely targeted stacks, and efficient interaction. Magda is very powerful, but her biggest advantage is that the cards she uses are really cheap. Still, despite all her strength, Magda never won a tournament. However, that's entirely because all our regulars are always building their decks with Magda in mind. Every single one of the winning decks played cards specifically to handle Magda, limiting her opportunities. And whenever she queued into a table that wasn't ready for her, or that didn't draw their counter cards quickly enough, she would run them over without much resistance. She made it to the finals many times, and always put up a commendable fight. She also absolutely tortured my existence in our practice games. I have played so much against Magda. If you feel sorry for me, and if you enjoyed the video so far, please give it a thumbs up, I would really appreciate that. And if you would like to support me more directly, please check out my Patreon, there's lots of bonus content on there, including deck tours, deck lists, and spoiler reviews. As for the deck lists today, you can find them in the description of the video. I'm not gonna paywall other people's deck lists, they're just down there. One of the coolest things about Budget Commander is that it's slower than regular competitive Commander, which means that combat-centered strategies are a lot more viable. We've had multiple winners that got there by just pummeling people into submission. A core component of those decks is stacks. Cards like Doorkeeper Thrall, Collector Oof, and even Mind Sensor that limit what our opponents can do and keep them busy while we hit them. However, while those are the cards that you think of when you hear stacks, these are actually not that important, and playing too many of them distracts from our actual main game plan. Rule of Law. Rule of Law is a 3-mana white enchantment that simply says each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. This is one of the strongest effects available. Competitive decks are often built with lots of cheap and efficient spells, but that efficiency becomes useless when you can only play one spell each turn. Any decks not built around Rule of Law get completely trashed by it, which is why a determining factor for the strongest decks is that they can either function through Rule of Law or get rid of it. But getting rid of it isn't that easy, because there are a lot of Rule of Law cards, most of which are creatures. Archon of Emeria, Phyrexian Censor, and Eidolon of Rhetoric all slow the game to a crawl. And few commanders crawl better than Kutzil, Malamute Exemplar. Kutzil, Malamute Exemplar, is a 3-mana Celestia 3/3 with 2 abilities. He prevents our opponents from casting spells during our turn, and whenever one or more creatures we control with power greater than its base deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. This lets us draw up to 3 cards each turn, as long as we hit each opponent once. Kutzil is probably the best user of Rule of Law because of how Rule of Law interacts with the action economy of a commander game. One spell each turn means that our opponents can only cast once on their own turn, but then also additional spells on every other player's turns. Since competitive decks tend to play lots of instant speed interaction, it's not unusual for players to be able to squeeze their way through the turns by relying on instants. This can become a problem for the Rule of Law player. If the opponents are waiting with their interaction until the Rule of Law player has cast a spell on their own turn, then they can't respond anymore. But since the Rule of Law deck is usually the combat deck, they need to play things on their own turn. Otherwise, they won't be able to kill anybody. And that's where Kutzil comes in. Kutzil prevents our opponents from casting spells on our turn, which means we never have to worry about getting locked out by our own Rule of Law. We get 4 spells per turn rotation, but our opponents only get 3. The natural response then would be to just kill Kutzil. But if you're killing Kutzil, then you didn't kill the Archon of Emeria. And for most decks, that's the real problem. Kutzil can also be recast. Keep in mind that Rule of Law really slows the game down. Recasting Kutzil once or even twice is not unreasonably difficult. And that's assuming you even get the boy dead. The list we saw at our tournament, and that I'm talking about right now, runs lots of protection spells, many of which are stapled to creatures. Boromir, Warden of the Tower, Selfless Spirit, and Bulwark Ox make the board indestructible, while Shalai, Voice of Plenty, gives it hexproof, and Bastion Protector keeps the commander safe. That, on top of actual instant speed interaction, makes this particular deck incredibly tough to take down. It's also structured around repeatable +1/+1 counter generation. Simple cards like Siege Veteran and Loyal Guardian that slowly but surely accumulate power on the board. Then consider that Kutzil draws up to 3 cards per turn. Slap a few overruns into the deck and have it be piloted by a skilled and patient player, and I think you can see why this deck won our 6th tournament. Kutzil is an absolute powerhouse in budget commander. So far, we've talked about combo and beatdown, but neither represents what I personally consider to be the strongest archetype in competitive budget commander: mid-range combo. These are decks that follow a well-tuned value plan, usually centered around a commander that can fight well and apply some pressure by itself. They then accumulate mana and card advantage with a variety of different synergy pieces. Eventually, they pivot into a combo bin that can require as few as 2 cards or as many as 4 or 5. The trick here is to structure the deck not around a single combo line, but rather many interconnected ones, while using cards that serve other utility purposes. One of those purposes being just killing our opponents through combat. It's not unusual that matches between good players take a while and go into the later turns. In those situations, it's very useful to be able to just kill another player. That doesn't mean these decks can reliably win through combat damage alone, but rather that they can apply enough pressure that combat damage is a factor, and that means they can permanently solve the problem that a specific player represents. That then brings us to our 3rd deck, Kediss and Malcolm. Kediss, Emberclaw Familiar, and Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator are an Izzet partner pairing. Kediss is a 2-mana red elemental lizard that makes it so that whenever a commander we control deals combat damage to an opponent, it also deals that much damage to each other opponent. Malcolm is a 3-mana blue 2/2 Siren Pirate with flying that creates a treasure token whenever 1 or more pirates we control deal damage to an opponent. Malcolm is a bit of a stupid card. Just like Kutzil, he can trigger up to 3 times at once, so long as we deal damage to up to 3 opponents. However, he doesn't specifically need us to deal combat damage. So long as a pirate deals any kind of damage at any time, then Malcolm makes a treasure. We can hit somebody with Malcolm while Kediss is out, who will make Malcolm deal damage to the other 2 opponents as well, and that then generates a total of 3 treasures. That's a huge amount of value every single turn, and gives us vast resources to interact with our opponents. We can counterspell their threats, remove their creatures, and dig for more cards, all while dealing noteworthy damage and having a board presence. Pair this with a couple of other pirates to enhance our treasure generation even more. Keep in mind that Kediss is a trigger, meaning it hits at a later timing than combat damage, letting us stack it with good old punching. That's 5 treasures for each combat. Then we just keep up a patient and careful game plan, apply some pressure with cards like Reckless Fireweaver and Tandem Lookout, and then regularly threaten kills with cards like Glinthorn Buccaneer, or by turning the Reckless Fireweaver into a pirate with cards like Mistform Mask. Once we do that, all we need is for an artifact to enter, then Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent, Malcolm creates 3 treasures, Reckless Fireweaver triggers again, and the game is over. The particular list I'm looking at even had Nifmisse Perun alongside Curiosity sneak in there. Kediss and Malcolm won the third tournament we hosted. It was a hard-fought win. There were a lot of spooky Izzet decks running around on that particular day, but still well-earned. I love Budget Commander. It's so expressive and has such a diverse meta that any tournament I host feels completely different from the previous one. New decks, new players, sometimes entirely new archetypes. The budget restriction enforces a fantastic fairness while also keeping the format accessible. There are many other decks I could tell you about, but for today, I just picked 3 that made sense and that I thought were interesting. I hope you enjoyed it. For the last tournament, I played Gretchen. I made a video about her. I told you about her a little while ago. The video did really well, that was nice. But also, I played her at the tournament, and I didn't ever tell you how it went. It went really well. I dominated the first 2 rounds. I could have won the 3rd round, it was really silly. I kind of, out of a joke, as a meme, agreed to a draw because I thought it was funny, and then I top-decked the win. Like, it was literally going into my turn. I was like, you guys want to draw? Because, like, it didn't matter. I was going to make it to the finals anyway. It was actually really weird. The entire table was pretty much guaranteed to make it to the finals because we had dominated the previous rounds. And then we just kind of agreed because it didn't make a difference to any of us, really. And I top-decked my win. I would have won. I just kind of like stupidly agreed to a draw because I thought it was funny. Anyways, and then we played the finals, and I'm a little upset. I'm a little upset because I navigated the finals really well. I had everything perfect. I had everything set up. I would have won. I knew what resources the other players had. I knew what place they were gonna go for. Everything was calculated. Everything was perfect. And then one of the other players made a horrible misplay that I just did not account for. It was a clear case of just like mental exhaustion, just a complete blunder that threw off all of my plans, that made no sense to anybody, even to the player himself. Just like, oh man, oh no. And then somebody else won. That's just a real shame. I would have won that tournament otherwise, but oh well, what can I do? You know, it goes how it goes. Nonetheless, the deck kicked ass. Like, it was the only deck that in those last 2 super competitive, you know, like final style games, actually regularly threatened wins. It's just a really scary deck, really powerful. But I'm not gonna play it again. Mostly just because I didn't think it was that much fun. I gotta find something else. Maybe I'll build 6 again, but 6 is so expensive these days, so probably not gonna build 6. I gotta find something else. Anyways, I am rambling. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to check out the Patreon. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up. And I want to talk more about Budget Commander. If you guys are down for that, I can make a whole bunch of videos like this. There are a lot of decks to talk about. I intentionally didn't talk about any of my own because I thought you guys might be more interested in hearing what other people did. But I don't know, maybe I can tell you about mine. Anyways, I'll see you guys. Goodbye.